current Angular, and then a bit about where we're going in the future. I'll start with talking about how Angular got here today by explaining a little bit of our history about Angular at Google. We started way back in 2009, where Angular was a small project that we just had a few people on. And we were super excited when we got to do an engineering review. And we got to do this engineering review with one of the senior vice presidents at Google. His name was Urs Holsey. Urs managed, and still does, he manages all of the Google's infrastructure, all of our big server farms, and our Google Cloud platform now. He gave us a bunch of feedback about what we had worked on, because when we presented it, we were excited that we were solving a lot of infrastructural problems for teams, making it much easier for them by giving them default structure in their applications, by making testing a first-class citizen, making that easy, and then just overall connecting all of the pieces end-to-end that a developer might need in their workflows. Urs gave us some feedback in a very, I think, special way, where after our presentation, we were really excited to get that little bit of advice that would take us to the next level. He said something different, though. What he said was, "You are all liars," which, as you can imagine, we were fairly heartbroken. We were really disappointed in this feedback. We thought maybe Angular was done, that we wouldn't be able to continue. We went back to our desks. We were all fairly sad. But later that day, I maybe felt a little rebellious, and I posted something on our internal social media board. This was called Google Buzz. I said this. I said, check out the framework Urs doesn't want you to use, which probably was a bad idea. But I did get a lot of feedback. A lot of people came to look. One of the people who came to look was Urs himself. And Urs posted that, hey guys, let me make myself clear. I said that with a smile. I'm not sure he did say that with a smile. And what I meant was that you haven't proven any of the claims that you have. As I think back, he was right. We really had not had all of the customer validation, all of the years of proving this on big projects to validate that Angular was everything that we said it was going to be. But in a way, this was a gift. This was a gift, something for us to strive against and something for us to overcome. If we fast forward to this year, Angular in 2018 at Google, we did some surveys about who uses what, who uses which web frameworks at Google. And just like outside Google, there are many choices inside Google. What we found, though, was that Angular is used by more front-end developers than any other web framework at Google. We've gone from getting some pretty stiff negative feedback at the beginning to being the #1 used thing across all of Google's front-end development at Google. Going beyond Google itself, we got some really good news earlier this year about adoption, where Crunchbase surveyed a number of seed and early stage startups. What they found was that the majority of them were picking Angular as their choice for front-end development. And they not only surveyed other front-end frameworks like React and Vue, but they also looked at the back-end ones as well, where you can render HTML and send it to the client. Things like Ruby, Express, Django, and ASP.NET. Angular gets used in conjunction with a lot of these back-end services, so it's not an either-or, but it was really cool to see how many of the new sort of startup companies were starting to use Angular. More broadly then, our best signal for who's using what in the Angular community is how many people come to the Angular.io website every month. What we can see is that going from the end of last year, where we had about 1 million monthly visitors, to this year, where we have 1.5 million visitors per month in the month of November, we've grown over 50%. This is an amazing growth record. For Angular, we've never grown this fast in any year in our entire history. We're really overwhelmed with the support we're getting from everyone out there. Tremendous news. Matter of fact, it's even better than this because we're not counting the traffic from angular.cn, our Chinese translated site, which many of you probably use. We don't really have analytics in here yet, but we're hoping to fix this. And so next year, when we have another conference, I hope we can come back and include these numbers to be fully representative of the size of the Angular community worldwide. You can actually help us grow, and I hope you do. There's a couple of different ways that you can do it. One reference would be maybe to go look at angular.meetup.com, where you can find meetups across the world. You can reach out to the people who organize those conferences for ideas on how to get one started in your area. And there probably is one if you're in a major city. There's another good resource, which is a blog post from some folks at Tesla, folks who make electric cars. They wrote up why and how they did meetups at their company as a way to help other people do this themselves. One of the things that they found they got out of this was that they themselves learned a number of new concepts by bringing in these new talks. They created a number of other social networks across the company, people they would not have interacted with otherwise. They themselves got more credit and more company-wide visibility. And they got some more confidence because they found that they could build something that was bigger than just on their team and help a really wide number of folks. You can check it out on the Angular blog. There's a link down here, and I will make sure that we share the link to the slide deck, so you don't have to worry about writing anything down while I'm presenting. This is important to me because as a kid, I was not welcome in the educational community where I grew up. Matter of fact, my teachers thought I was so far off that this is what they told my parents. They said, Brad will never go to college and will likely never have a full-time job. I was very slow in school. I got sent to the remedial classrooms, and I was not really being well served by the educational community that was with me. Luckily for me, though, my parents and my teacher continued to talk, and they found some ways to include me in the regular classes. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't get that support. And so I hope that we think about folks like myself, and maybe some of you are like this, when we reach out and we try and include everybody in the Angular community and bring them along. Some of the folks who are doing this well are folks in the ngGirls community. ngGirls teaches free classes to women who are entering the tech world, helping them adopt Angular skills so they can immediately get a great job building Angular applications. You can see down here that they've built classes that happen around the world, and you can get involved to help them if you like. One of the ways you might get involved, if you own a company, you can help sponsor events. You can email them at this email address and maybe get some exposure for your company at the same time. You can donate personal money. You can give them some cash, which is another form of helping support them. The best way that I think maybe you might be able to help them, though, is by volunteering to help teach some courses with them. You can actually even get them to help build a course set for your local community and help bring that to where you are. I love this one because you not only get to help people, but at the same time you learn. Every time I've taught a course, I've always learned a ton because I have to answer questions that I might not have run across in my normal development. What I'm hoping is that you help us create excellent interactions in the community. It's really important that for us to all have a good time, we all support each other. Let me give you an example of what excellent interaction might be. This is my daughter, and I want to tell you a little story. When she was 4, I was helping make dinner in the kitchen, and she comes in and asks me, she says, Daddy, do you pick your nose? And I felt kind of conflicted. At the same time, I wanted to tell her the truth, but I also wanted to set her up for success in life. So I said, well, yeah, honey, maybe I did when I was a kid, but now I've learned that it's better to use a tissue. It's really better. She goes on to say, Daddy, when you were a kid, did you pick your nose and eat your boogers? And again, I was kind of conflicted. And I said, no, baby, I just use a tissue. That's far better. And she goes on to say, Daddy, do you want to see me eat my boogers? Then don't look at me. And this was kind of funny. But what she was really asking is, what is acceptable social behavior? What kind of behavior is expected of me? So we actually have a code of conduct in the Angular community that helps define what sort of behavior we should do. And most of the time, good stuff happens, and this is what maybe a regular distribution of behavior would look like. But that code of conduct only really needs to be used on the very worst behavior. And normally we never have to bring it up, because what we really want is to shift everyone towards the good behavior. And that's really what we see, is kind of an uneven distribution, where in the Angular community, there's a ton of support. And we'd love for you to help with this. So here's what you can do. If you see bad things, you see interactions that have a little more friction or seem to be going in the wrong direction, all of us community organizers would love to help out. We would love to make things better. It's normal for things to go a little bit wrong, but tell us and we can help out. If you see good stuff, please tell everyone. This is a way that we can all know how to use a tissue instead of maybe eating our boogers. All right, enough about community. I want to talk a little bit about what we've recently done in Angular's version 6 and 7 to support you in building a better developer experience. And then we'll move on to the future of Angular and what we'll be building next. If you're new to the Angular community, Angular comes with a tremendous number of features, tools, and pretty much everything you need to build applications. Everything from Angular core itself that has things like data binding, dependency injection, all of the basics to build applications. We've got a wonderful suite to build forms-based input. We have support for building progressive web applications for PWAs. We've got a language services plugin that gives you support in any IDE so that you get rich command completion, jumping to definition, all of those fun things. We support testing with end-to-end tests on Protractor and with unit tests on Karma. I'll cover a couple of these things in depth, but the thing I would like you to take away from this is that Angular provides for your end-to-end development experience, and this is unique to Angular in what you might choose for building front ends, where everything is guaranteed to work together, works at the same version, and is all documented on the same website. So any of that integration work is taken away, so you don't have to worry about it. One of the things that we've been working on recently is a product called Angular Universal. We've had it around for a while, but we've been reinvesting in it because we've been deploying it on applications at Google. To refresh your memory, if you're not familiar with server-side rendering, what happens here is that the first request comes in from somebody's browser, and then we actually run your application on a Node.js server, and we send back just a rendered version of the HTML for that application. We then allow that user to interact with that content, scroll around, and actually see that this is the application they wanted, while the rest of the JavaScript is coming down. At that point, JavaScript takes over, and it's a single-page application from then on out. If you're building an application just for your company, you might not need this, but for people building applications that are available widely, this is usually a good idea. And here's some scenarios where you might want it. Number one, if you need to build application previews, if your application needs to link, provide links that embed in other applications, maybe a social media application, this is something that's really important to do on your server, because those social media applications will not run your JavaScript to render your application. You need to do that for them. For speed, for that initial download, if you're targeting mobile devices or devices where you just really need that first load to be super fast, downloading just the HTML first can be much, much faster than doing the JavaScript as well. Then for search engine optimization as well, Many of the search engines will run your JavaScript to try and render it, but usually they do a much better job if you just give them an HTML rendered version of the application. In other words, if you want to be good, fast, or popular, maybe server-side rendering could be a thing your application needs. We recently released this on one of Google's big applications called Shopping Express. As the name implies, it's a shopping application for buying all kinds of household goods. Their goal was to make the speed for mobile devices much faster. And what we found was that at the 90th percentile, applications rendered 2.3 times faster than with the regular Angular application alone. It was a really great result. We've been building a rich set of tooling, and one of the things that we did recently this summer was we helped people who were migrating from AngularJS to Angular. We built a tool that helps them out with the following things. Number one, when you run it on your application, it will analyze your AngularJS application. It will help you by outlining the preparation you needed to do to migrate your application. And then it recommends a migration path for you to help you get along from the older AngularJS application style into a modern Angular application. The core tool that we offer is actually this thing called the Angular CLI. And if you've built Angular applications, you've obviously used this already. If you haven't, I'll just give a brief overview. We started off with some very simple commands in the CLI. One was called new, where you can create new applications. And second, generate, that allows you to create components, directives, pipes, services, and all of the other features of your application very quickly, because it will generate that code for you without you having to write it. In version 6, we added two other really important and useful commands. One was called update. Update's job is to make it super easy for you to go from one version of Angular to the next. Update, going from Angular 6 to 7, does the automatic conversions and updates your code so that it can very quickly and easily take advantage of version 7. The add command then allows you to add new aspects of code to your application. And I'll explain this a little bit more here. If I use ngAdd, I can do things like add extensions for building a progressive web app, for example, by saying ngAdd at Angular/PWA. I can add Angular elements, which I'll talk about a little bit later. We can add Angular material design components if you want to download that widget library. There are many other widget libraries as well that you can download. Things like the Clarity components from VMware, the Bootstrap components, and many others. Once you've downloaded those things, you get a new set of generate schematics that allow you to add other aspects to your application. Once you've, for instance, installed the library for Angular material, you can then add a navigation bar with just a single simple command. Or I can do something like ngAdd at Angular material, material-nav, and you give a name for inside your application. We've got a rich ecosystem of libraries that support ngAdd, and there's more coming every day. One of those that we've worked with a lot is one called NativeScript. NativeScript allows you to build native applications for Android and iOS using the same development tools as you do for Angular. You use HTML-style templates, and you also get access to all of the underlying libraries in iOS and Android to build those native user interfaces. The thing that they've done recently is they've made it possible to share code with your web application. So that where I would have done ngServe to launch my web app in Angular, I can now, in the same code base, do npm run iOS and npm run Android to bundle my native apps out of that same code base. They've built a really rich documentation site that explains how to do all of this. It explains what type of code you can and should share between your web and your mobile applications, and just everything you would need to do to be successful in building Angular applications that span from the web to Android to iOS. While we're still talking about the Angular CLI, we've worked with some partners at a company called Narwhal to build something called the Angular console. Because we know that not everyone wants to work on the command line, they've built a graphical user interface for the Angular CLI. It's exactly the same features, but now it has a nice graphical user interface on top. One of the cool things you get with this is it's a single download install. You download the application, you install it, everything is ready for you. Everything you need to start building Angular applications. There's no more NPM installs or anything else that you need to do. Super simple to get going. And then rather than having to look at the documentation to figure out all of the things that the CLI can do, it's all something that you can explore through the user interface. You can interactively find out what the commands are so that you can easily add these new aspects to your application. One more place that we've worked to integrate the Angular CLI commands is a UI tool called Stacklets. Stacklets is an editor like VS Code that runs inside the web browser, where you can very quickly start and deploy Angular applications. And we've worked with them to include not just the CLI extensions, but also the Angular language service. Because of the way that they can cache a bunch of the code and pre-render some things, it actually can be faster than editing on your desktop. It's a pretty cool experience. And one last thing on the CLI, we've now moved the docs into the main doc site for Angular to make all of the command reference much easier to find and much easier to read. Since we know that building your applications, a lot of it is in building those widgets that express the user interface. We support you in two different ways. One is with a set of user interface controls called the material design components. It's everything that we use to build applications here at Google, exported so that anyone in the world can use it. And many companies do. Everything you might need to build a rich application is there for you, built at the same level of quality that we need for the biggest applications in the world at Google, where we've thought about performance and accessibility and internationalization and anything else you might think of. At the same time, we know that a lot of folks are going to want to pick a different look and feel for their applications. And so we built something called the Angular Component Dev Kit that you can use without the material design components. If you've got your own look and feel that you want to support, if you want to build your own components, or even if you wanted to extend the components that we built, you can build on top of this library to take advantage of the behaviors that we've built for things that I mentioned, like accessibility and BiDi, and getting overlays to pop up in exactly the right place. We also create a set of what I'll call generic components. These are unopinionated user interface components for things like the data table and the tree that you can build on top of to make it look like and behave like whatever you want. So it's a great starting point for some of the hardest components to get right. Again, you can use them without the material design components to build whatever look and feel you want. We recently added drag and drop and virtual scrolling so that you can add some rich interactivity to your applications and make them usable for really large data sets. One of the other companies that's building UI components on top of the Angular CDK is a company called Nebular. This is a different look and feel for building web applications. They're all free. You might take a look at them. They actually come with more than just the user interface elements. They also have some pretty cool authentication strategy and security bits built in. And they're all built on top of the Angular CDK. One more thing before I leave this area of UI components. We've been working with some other teams here at Google to build a drag and drop UI prototype builder. When most user interface engineers build applications or when they design them, usually they work in some static tool like Sketch or some other Adobe product to build what looks like the application. But there's a problem here in that it's an approximation of what the application is going to be. They actually have to look at what the existing application does in terms of CSS metrics and fonts, and they copy them into some other application. Then they have to re-export them, or you have to copy and paste these design metrics into your HTML and CSS to make the design and the user interface match. This tool, which we're calling Angular Co-Design, aims to fix this. Because what you can do is you can import any suite of Angular user interface components into it, design your user interface, build a fully working prototype that you can test with your users, and then export the templates to start building the real application with them. And because they use the actual same user interface elements that you'll be using in your applications, there's no correction that you're going to have to do between what you built for your mocks and your prototypes into the real application. This is planned to be available in the first half of 2019 for everybody. We're already using it inside Google, so we think we're gotten pretty far along. I want to talk a little bit about the future of Angular now. And to talk about the future, I should maybe reflect on my past, so I'm humble enough to do it appropriately. Here's a company photo from a company that was called Next Computer. Next is one of the companies that Steve Jobs built. He left Apple, he built Next, and then eventually went back to Apple. Here I am in the back. There's a little pointer to me. And here's Steve in the front. My job at Next was to build demo applications for Steve, help him travel around and set up his machines when he did demos. One of my other jobs was to help customers set up demos for Steve when they came to visit us. One of the guys who came to set up a demo at Next was this guy called Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee, if you might know, was the guy who invented the World Wide Web. He was not famous at the time. He came in and he said, "Hey, Brad, I want to share this thing with Steve where I built a new tool called the World Wide Web. What it lets you do is connect all of the world's research papers together, and it's really going to change the way we think about knowledge in the world." And I was about maybe 25 years old and not so wise at the time. And I said, World Wide Web seems like a really dumb name, and research papers, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be successful. I was very, very wrong. So with that humility, I always reflect on this a little bit when I go to think about predicting the future for other things, as we're about to delve into the future of Angular. One of the things that we're working on for Angular is improving how you build applications. At Google, we actually have all of the source code for all of our applications in a single source code repository. And because of this, we have to have a very capable system that can build everything very incrementally and very fast. And so that's what this Bazel tool does. And that's what we hope to offer to everyone outside of Google. It scales up to the world's largest code base at incredible speed. One of the very cool things about it is it allows you to test build not just JavaScript and TypeScript, but any of your backend languages as well. It works for Java and C# and Go and pretty much anything else that you might be using on your backend, so that you can build your entire application end to end, test it, and release that fully tested binary so you've got a fully robust release process. Our plan is to build this into the Angular CLI, and our goal is actually to have it in the CLI for you to try out this month in December. Where we are now is that it's in what we call labs, which means it's an experimental thing that you can do. You can actually reach out to us if you want to get started before it's in the CLI, but it's going to be there pretty soon. So we're accepting early access. And as I mentioned, pretty much everyone's going to be able to do this sometime in December. One of the good proof points, we wanted to make sure that it worked for us before we asked you to use it. And so we're already using Bazel to build the entire Angular framework and all of the components that integrate with it. So we've got some pretty good confidence that this is going to work well for your projects. The big thrust for what we're going to be doing next year is in two parts that work well together. And the reason we're doing these things is we're trying to extend Angular from where we've been super strong in building industrial strength, big applications, into lighter weight use cases for websites, smaller applications where they need to load very quickly, and maybe I don't need so much of what we've built in the Angular environment. We've made a lot of progress toward this already, where I mentioned we have Angular Universal for doing a very fast first-time render. We've invested a lot in optimization for your JavaScript and doing lazy loading so that your interactive part of your application can load just a little bit at a time as your user needs it. We've recently built something called Angular Elements. I'll talk a little bit about what this is, but it allows me to publish small parts of an Angular application or just small Angular applications by themselves. And then we've got a new UI renderer called Ivy. And I'll talk more about that. The way Angular Elements works is it allows me to take any of the UI elements that I've created or even small Angular applications and embed them in any UI framework on a website or no UI framework at all. And the reason we can do this is we rely on some standards, a part of the standards that's part of the suite called web components. We allow you to publish an Angular element as what's called a custom element. And a custom element allows you to define your own DOM elements. So you can take your Angular components that you will already know how to build and publish them in a way that it looks like any other DOM element, like a checkbox or a radio button or any other kind of form input. But they're your custom Angular components. They will have a standard interface that everybody already knows how to interact with. To communicate with it, they can set the properties on that element, and they can listen for events that come out of it. And the Angular elements does that mapping between what you build in Angular and what needs to happen in the custom elements. Because they're part of the browser, they're actually self-bootstrapping. For the folks who consume these, that embed them in their applications, all they need to do is load the bundle of JavaScript that you produce for them, and then they can just start adding the DOM elements that you've defined for them, and they light up immediately. There's no bootstrapping work for them to do. And this truly works everywhere. All of the modern browsers support custom elements, and there's a polyfill for any of the older browsers. As I mentioned, these are available now, but we're going to make them much more powerful with the new renderer that I'll talk about now. Ivy's this new renderer that we've been working on for a while that allows us some much more powerful interactions in the Angular environment. Number one, we want to make Angular smaller and we want to enable faster compilation. Right now, when you compile an application, oftentimes the compiler needs to recompile the entire app. With Ivy, it only needs to recompile the source code file that you changed so that you get much, much more incremental compilation and much faster turnarounds in building your apps. We also wanted to make sure that debugging was very simple. Today in Angular applications, you end up having to debug sort of the interpreter that we've built. But in Ivy, instead of having an interpreter, we generate a very small set of DOM manipulation commands that look very much like the template you created, or what you might have written by hand if you were going to write DOM manipulation commands manually. So how much smaller when I say smaller? If inside Google, if I ask some of my Angular engineers to build the smallest version of Angular that can still run, they were able to strip it down to about 36K in the current renderer. I made them a bet, and I said that I will bake you a cake if you can get the Hello World version of Angular in under 10K. And this was a credible threat because I used to be a cook. I used to run a catering business. And so I'm pretty good at this. And they got pretty close, and they said, well, Brad, did you mean the minified version or the compressed version? And I said, you know what? I don't really care. Just give me an excuse to bake you a cake. I like cake. And what we found was that the current Ivy implementation, the minified version comes in at 7.3K, and the compressed version comes in at 2.7K. It can be incredibly small. Not that you're going to be building Hello World applications too much, but this really shows how Ivy can tree shape down to the smallest possible, and so you only really pay for only the components that you use. Where we are with this right now, we've built the Ivy runtime, and that's how we got those development numbers. We've taught the template compiler to generate these new Ivy commands. We're now at the point where we're making sure that it runs with all of the applications at Google. Our plan is to release a version in labs so that you can get an early preview of this before the final release, but we hope that's not too long. Thanks so much. If you like, you can stay in touch with us and find out all of the updates that we have via Twitter/Angular and YouTube.com/Angular. And if there are other ways that work better for China, we would love to know so that we can stay in touch with you more. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I hope you have a great conference.